Artificial intelligence is here. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Daniel Lopez. This is the AI Education Conversation, where we explore the opportunities, risks, and the impacts of AI across education. Let's jump in. What's up, everyone? Hope July has treated you well. I'm back. Over the past month, I've taken a break from my AI learning journey, as you may have noticed. The reason for this is my wife and I recently embarked on a new lifelong learning journey as we welcomed our baby boy to the family. As we ramp up into next school year, I do plan on jumping back into a weekly cadence of posting episodes. I think having these critical conversations around how we can reimagine AI, reimagine education using AI is so important, and we're going to continue this work. That being said, let's jump into today's episode. In today's episode, we are going to explore how AI continues to impact educators. Really excited to jump into my conversation with Michael Smith. Now, Michael, he's an OG AI education conversation listener. He's been on this AI learning journey around the same time that I started my journey earlier this year. He and I already have had some insightful conversations on LinkedIn around how he's been using AI and thinking about AI within his role as a health and physical education leader in Australia. And so it was only a matter of time before we got him onto the podcast here and we were able to have our conversation around how we continue to learn and grow with AI tools. Now, before we jump into the full conversation with Michael, as always, let's jump into a few AI updates. Nearly 55% of organizations are experimenting with generative AI, and about 18% have already implemented it, according to a survey done by VentureBeat. Now, specifically, they found that the survey of data, IT, AI, security, and marketing executives found that fewer than 5% of companies have decided not to consider using generative AI at all, while most companies are continuing to experiment with it, around 55%. Only 18% expect to raise spending on the technology in this coming year. Most people, how are they using it? They're using it, as you can imagine, for natural language processing tasks such as messaging, chat, being able to shorten that. The second most popular use case is content creation. And a surprising number, 32%, are using the technology for other purposes. Now, really, what this says to me and what this signals to me is as the workforce continues to adjust and explore ways to adopt AI tools, we're going to have to change. In education specifically, we're going to have to change. Now, I don't think that this is going to completely flip the table on the way that we do work going into next year. Clearly, a lot of companies are still in that exploratory phase and still trying to figure out for themselves many ways that they can use AI tools to make their workflows more efficient or more effective. But I think what this does signals is everybody continues to be very engaged around AI tools and how these things can reimagine the way they do their work. And so if we really want our students to be prepared for a world where they're inheriting these jobs and they're prepared for the opportunities that they exist once they graduate, it's going to be very critical that we continue to make sure that they are literate in these AI tools as well. So, very big signal for us. I also imagine that this may also initially disproportionately affect certain industries. I can very much anticipate it'll disrupt industries like health, business, technology, advertising, potentially initially. But I would imagine over time, as we continue to develop AI tools, this can continue to compound. So, very important red flag and signal for us. We need to make sure that we're continuing to stay diligent and providing opportunity for our educators as well for our students to be able to engage and explore AI tools. Let's move on to our next update. This one's been out for a little while now, but I want to make sure that you all are aware of this because I think it's indicative of a very important point. A couple of weeks ago, a study by Stanford and Berkeley researchers found that OpenAI's language models performed worse in some areas in June compared to March. Now, just so that we're all on the same page here, OpenAI's language models, as you all know, GPT 3.5, GPT 4, those are the large language models that power ChatGPT, which is continues to be the most popular AI tool currently and was really the tool that kind of started this revolution for a lot of folks. And a specific example that they provide as to how these tools have performed worse is they found that GPT-4, which is the most up to date large language model, its accuracy in identifying prime numbers dropped from 98% in March to 2% in June. So it seems to really be struggling with a lot of the analytical pieces, some of the things that they were really touting about in the white paper that they wrote when they first released GPT-4, which showed it was its ability to, perform very effectively on standardized exams and perform a lot of these analytical tasks really well. Saying a little bit more specifically about their performance piece here, what the researchers found in the non peer reviewed study is that they also examined the performance of GPT 3.5 in areas like solving math, answering dangerous sensitive questions, generating code, and visual reasoning. And they found that GPT 4 continued to show less willingness to answer sensitive questions in June, and both models had more formatting mistakes in code generation. So I know a lot of folks, they continue to use these tools to actually develop code, and they're finding that there's some mistakes. Now you may ask yourself, well, why is this happening? The paper, what it tries to highlight here is an issue that is news to me, but it's something I think that makes a lot of sense and is going to be very important as we continue to navigate this landscape here. The challenge of drift. Now, what's drift? Now, in the paper, if you take some time to explore this, drift can occur in two different ways: model drift or data drift. Essentially, what that means is, as we all know, these models, ChatGPT, Bard, Bing, Claude, all of these tools are being powered by models that technology companies have created to be able to do these phenomenal things, right? To be able to provide these very conversational answers back to you when you're asking it questions, when you're designating specific prompts for the model to work through. Now, though, these models, as you know, they're static, right? So they developed them over a series of time, and it has an algorithm, it has specific things, but it's not changing on a daily basis. But the problem is that the data set, the information is changing, right? And in most cases, a lot of these models are directly connected to the internet. The internet changes rapidly and continues to evolve every single second as information continues to compound. And the challenge there is, as they're developing a model, they may not actually be able to keep up with the real world environment that exists when you're talking about something as large, vast, and dynamic, as complicated as the internet and being connected to the internet. So a lot of technology companies are continuing to explore this model drift and how they're able to ensure that they can keep that accuracy and performance over time. But really, what this highlights is that with model drift, just because ChatGPT is performing very effectively today doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be as effective next week. It's very important that they continue to maintain, evolve the models as the information changes. Now, the second type of drift that can occur is what's called data drift. What is data drift? Well, data drift, as I understand it, simply what it means is, it's humans, the internet, the information on the internet, it's not all right, right? Us as humans, we're very subjective, we're very imperfect. We have different information, as we all know, and we constantly see, most prominently during political elections. A lot of fake information can be publicized out there. But the problem is that in the way that these models are sometimes collecting information, they're not always collecting it based on truth. Sometimes they're collecting it based on volume, right? If there's a particular story or a particular uh, opinion being shared out there on multiple sources and through multiple volume, these language models may sometimes consider that to be truth because of the number of times something is being said or shared, not necessarily because it's true, but because a lot of people or a lot of sources are sharing it. The problem with the way that the internet works is, as we know, that's it's very prone to doing that because a lot of this information is imperfect and impartial. So we are going to have to continue to navigate some of these challenges. I think the reason that it's so important that we continue to reiterate the significance of this study, as well as these ideas of model drift and data drift, is you can't take any of these responses at face value. Now, does that mean that tomorrow you should stop using any of these tools and discontinue it until the performance improves? No, doesn't mean that. And oftentimes you may be using these sources in a way that actually doesn't require information connected to the internet. If you're doing like a synthesis task where you're providing the information, summarization tasks, or role play, may not actually need it. But high level, what it means is don't take things at face value. Make sure that you're still interrogating the information that it provides. We need to continue to be vigilant about some of the answers that we received. AI tools like ChatGPT, there are tools, right? We don't want to over rely on these things. We want to make sure that we continue to be in the driver's seat, continue to think, and we don't over rely on these tools because high level we have to remember that one of the big main priorities when they are developing their responses and the natural language processing for some of these tools is they're supposed to sound convincing and human like, right? So oftentimes when we're getting answers back, we may be compelled because of the syntax or the way that they constructed their ideas. Doesn't always mean it's right though. So it's very, very important that we continue to interrogate this. And as always, if we continue to do that, I have no doubt that it's still going to continue to make a lot of the work that we're doing very efficient and allow us to save some time in completing some of the tasks that we have to do on a day-to-day basis. That being said, let's close out our updates with the note of good news, as AI tools are actually making a really big impact in healthcare. And Inside AI actually reported that AI helped to detect 20% more breast cancer cases from mammograms compared to screenings by only radiologists, according to early results from a large scale study. The research, conducted in Sweden with over 80,000 women, also showed that AI lowered radiologist workloads by nearly half. So specifically, AI was analyzing half of the women's scans before they were being reviewed by radiologists alone, while the other half were being examined by two radiologists. The AI assisted group had a 20% higher cancer detection rate than the standard approach. The AI system had no increase in false positives, suggesting it's safe for breast cancer detection. The use of AI also led to 44% reduction in radiologist mammogram reading workload. So, very similar to what has been one of the initial impacts of AI tools in the education industry. In healthcare, it appears to be a little bit similar, where some of these tools can actually be very effective in completing significant tasks and reducing the workload for some folks, in doing some of this work. So, that being said, caveat as always, despite a shortage of radiologists globally, the study's lead author does still stress that we need to continue to do trials and evaluation before rolling out AI on a broader scale, right? I don't think this study means let's adopt it across the board, but really good news. And again, the more that we can use AI tools and technology to support and make a difference in society, make a positive human impact, I think that's fantastic. Let's jump to my conversation with Michael Smith. After my conversation with Michael, I was so excited about how far he and I have come. And for any of you listeners who have continued on this AI journey up to this point, from dipping our toe into AI waters to having an hour-long conversation around the many use cases we've been able to leverage AI to make our lives easier, what I loved about this is that Michael, he's really exploring AI use cases from a health and physical education perspective in the education system in Australia. Well, as many of you might know, I have very deep experiences engaging with high schools in Texas and Massachusetts here in the United States through my roles as a college access counselor, as a managing director of program with the college access nonprofit One Goal. Um, so we're coming at it from two very different perspectives, right? But interestingly enough, there's actually a lot of trends in this episode about how we were able to use AI in the unique context of our daily roles to achieve very similar tasks. As more education practitioners continue to start asking questions and engaging with tools like ChatGPT, like Bing, like Bard, like Claude, like Hugging Face, I know more folks are going to start to get the bug like Michael and I have it. Identifying ways to use these tools to save time for yourself, cut down on mundane tasks so you can save your mental bandwidth on the areas which matter most. So, really excited to jump into this conversation. As always, let me know what you think about today's conversation at the AI Ed Convo on Twitter. I guess it's called X now. So on X, curiosity opens doors, connections build bridges, learnings pave the way. Humans are at the heart of AI education. I will see you all next week. All right. Michael Smith, welcome to the AI education conversation.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me, Daniel.
Yeah, I know. So, you and I have had some conversations just through messaging, and I've been just personally very humbled because our paths have crossed, and I don't know that we ever would have connected had it not been for this podcast. You have kind of reached out to me because you've heard some episodes and been kind of just interested in some of the conversations we've had thus far, and that has led to this opportunity for us to kind of jump in and get to know each other a little bit further.
Yeah, exactly. And for me, it was probably your podcast that really spiked my interest in AI, and the conversations that you've been having, and all the way over here in Tasmania, Australia. I started to chime in and was really interested in what the area could potentially provide, and then those discussions that you were influencing there. So it's been a really nice journey for me over the last probably 5 to 6 months in this space. But yeah, your podcast has been really pivotal in terms of making sure that I kind of keep on track with my thinking, where all the conversation's going, because we've had some really interesting conversations from a work point of view, um, with my day job, and then also with my business. So yeah, it's been really interesting.
Yeah. No, I really appreciate that. And yeah, I'm really excited to get into this conversation with you, Michael. I know we've, like I mentioned, had a little bit of back and forth, and I think you're bringing a lot of very unique perspectives. Really interested in hearing more about what the education landscape is like in Australia. Obviously, your unique niche in education. I think just the AI use case there is something that I don't have too much experience with, and I'm always very fascinated when someone is using AI to influence a different facet of education, and just even expanding my own thinking about in what ways these tools can help us to transform the landscape. So before we get too far, I mean, I'd love to hear a little bit about your story here. So I mean, you've been in education and you've been in the game for a while. I know in a lot of different
Mm,
places. So tell us a little bit about your
yeah.
journey in education, where you are now potentially too, and how you stumble or how you're using AI, or if not, we can actually get to that later. But first, actually, before I get too far, how'd you get in education? What are you up to now, and how'd you get there?
Yeah. So, um, well, going back to my university days, I did what's called a Bachelor of Human Movement, which is preparation to be a HP Health and Physical Education teacher. We add the H to the PE quite strongly here in Australia, um, and at that point in time, I was looking to get through university to start some teaching, so I could try and be a professional cyclist at the time. So it was kind of a second role to what my main aim was, to do some racing over in Europe, and also around Australia. So um, that was an interesting kind of period of my life where I met my current wife, and we decided that it might be best to stay in Australia, and I started falling in love a little bit with teaching more than I'd kind of anticipated. And the next thing I knew, I decided, well, I could probably do both. So I was racing full time here in Australia and teaching, and kind of just fell into a number of roles within the schools that I was working at. And long story short, was head of department after a number of years in the high school that I was working at, years 7 to 10, and from there, just my wife and I had a good discussion about doing something a little bit different. And so in 2019, just before COVID, it was a kind of a really interesting period to travel. But we moved to China, where I moved into. My wife moved into a HPE role at an international composite bilingual school, and I took up a position as a um, prep prep to year 4, year 5 teacher at a bilingual school, with anticipation of joining my wife a bit thereafter. Anyway, long story short, ended up joining my wife in the school that we were at, and I was, then moved into a director role there, with co-curricular, and yeah, 3 4 years, absolutely amazing experience for us and our 8-year-old at the moment. So he did 3 4 years, really formative years, and somewhere completely different, and that was really engaging for him. Um, and then yeah, found ourselves with a newborn in the Shanghai lockdown. So that was a crazy period, and decided that it was time to come home back to Australia, Tassie, and that was when all the while I was also working with a side passion of mine, and a good friend of mine, Nathan Parkin, who's now in the UK, who's been working with us in this, is Fizzy Games. So looking at digitising and gamification of physical education, or physical activity in general. And so I've been dabbling with that as well. And got home, and then all its AI dropped. And I was lucky enough to win a role in our education department here in Tasmania, as a curriculum lead for health and physical education across our 200 odd schools, in our lovely state. And that's when the journey with AI began. So it's been a bit of a whirlwind last 15 to 16 years, but a really exciting one. And to come to this point now with AI where it's at is really exciting.
Yeah, it sounds like you've had a tremendously fascinating last few years here. I can't even imagine what the experience of being in China during the pandemic must have been like in terms of just the social day to day or lack thereof. And obviously, then you go back to Australian experience that I would imagine in a very different way. Going through some of the same challenges there. Before we dig too much into the AI pieces, I'd actually love to just hear more about your experiences in those different educational systems. I personally only really have experience in the higher ed and the primary and secondary education systems here in the United States, and so I'd love to just get a little bit more context of what those educational experiences are like. So maybe let's start a little bit with the Australian one. I mean, the first thing that immediately stood out to me about the system as you described it is you said that I think the school that you used to work at was 7th to 10th, which
Yeah.
is very unique already for the United States. Most of our high schools, as we would call them, are 9th to 12th grade. So I'm curious if you could maybe paint the picture a little bit of some of the pieces of the. I know this is a very daunting question, but
Yeah, yeah,
just
yeah. No,
anything,
that's
any
okay.
context you could share that defining characteristics of the Australian education system as you know it or as you
Yeah,
see it.
yeah, yeah. I suppose professionally, my current role as curriculum lead. The point to start with is, we're very lucky in that we've got an Australian curriculum, that's been implemented currently at different stages with states and territories across Australia, and the curriculum itself is prep, or we call it prep here in Tasmania, but the Australian curriculum calls it foundation through to year 10. And that's across all learning areas, so 8 learning areas. And that kind of, I suppose, establishes a really good benchmark for all states and territories to govern what curriculum's happening across what year groups, etc. So yeah, generally here in Tasmania, speaking from Tasmanian experience, generally speaking, it's prep through to, so you have your early years, and then prep through to year 6, primary schools, and then year 7. It used to be years 7 to 10 predominantly, but we've actually moved to a model where it's now years 7 to 12, where the high schools are now providing years 11 and 12 courses in preparation for university, but at smaller amount of students. We still have colleges, so years 11 and 12 colleges, where predominantly most of the students go. But this is the public system. In the private system, K through to year 12 is generally kind of the structure. So the expectation around Australian curriculum and delivering Australian curriculum is, I suppose, fairly loose at this point in time as it's being implemented, but over 3, 4, 5 year turnarounds, there will be expectations around schools adopting, particularly the public sector, adopting that curriculum. But yeah, hopefully that gives you a little bit of context in that Australian space. Various states and territories work at different levels to that, but generally very similar.
That's interesting. So yeah, I have a few clarifying questions if you don't mind. I think the first I'm curious about is you'd mentioned that you use this word loose, and so I would define like the United States education system very similarly, right? Where we have like what we would call our federal United States government, our Department of Education. does provide a lot of like guidance. There's like some national standards that exist. There's even some national standardized exams that are passed. But the way that our system works is the education system is like very state focused, and so for a lot of these exams, states can like opt out if they have like an exam that checks the boxes in terms of like meeting the national one with state variations. States and even local school districts have kind of like authority to modify like the experience or the standards or create policies based on their unique experiences or priorities. And it's not uncommon to go to say like a high school in a state like Massachusetts where I currently work, and then go one like in Texas where I used to work, and those are just like vastly different educational
Yep.
experiences
Yeah.
in terms of what the environment looks like, what they're talking about, classes that they're in. Like I know when I was in Texas, like as an example, during seventh grade, a course that they had unique in Texas was like they're taking like Texas history for seventh grade, which is
Mm.
obviously not something that they're doing in other states. And so would you say that it's like similar in the Australian system where it's like very hyper
Yeah.
focused at the state and local level?
Yeah. 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 Definitely. And although there's a governing Australian curriculum, for example, Victoria, New South Wales, they actually have their own curriculums, but then slowly adopting. The idea is, I think, over the next 3 to 4 years to have an adoption of the Australian curriculum within most states and territories. Some will always potentially adopt some elements, but predominantly within their own context. Because we know how much curriculum is contextual, isn't it, in terms of proper delivery. So there's no one with an iron fist going, "You have to do this." However, there are there is content around our respectful relationship content in, for example, in health physical education, where there's some expectations around consent education being one. Um, and so I think over time there will be various adoptions of the Australian curriculum, but very similar to what you're saying, it can be vastly different if you're from state to territory in Australia, but predominantly within Tasmania and in our education department, which essentially the we're one of the first states to adopt the Australian curriculum in its entirety, with the idea that we want some consistency, and so within our jurisdiction, most schools, if you walked into a maths class at the north of the state versus south, should be seeing fairly similar content, fairly similar curriculum that's being delivered.
Got it. So like moving towards this approach a little bit, at least in Tasmania, towards standardization, which again, it would
Yep.
not be uncommon in the United States as well to see like some states or local school districts moving towards that, some moving away from that. Something that is unique to the United States education system, which again may actually be the case as well in Australia. I don't have too much context, is can also be very political. So like right
Yep.
now, there's something that's also happening, which is just based on like political ideologies that exist in this country, especially around just like identity.
Mm.
There's like certain states who are like very strongly resisting certain curriculum, certain lessons be
Yep.
taught, in particular around like LGBTQIA education, and in particular also around like slavery, and just
Mm.
like how that's
Mm.
treated and how that's like perceived. And so there's certain states, in particular in the southern part of the United States, Florida, Texas, that are like really, really pushing forth like it has to be either be taught in this way or not at all,
Mm.
or like
Mm.
passing. And then
Mm.
other states, obviously, that are doing vastly different. Is Australia kind of similar, where there's kind of some politicized topics or subjects that can kind of
I
come
think,
out?
yeah, I think there's in the Australian curriculum, there's content in there that hasn't been taught before, or hasn't been an emphasis that has come into that curriculum or in that space, and the challenges has been ensuring that. I think challenges that we're facing is ensuring that teachers feel supported in either delivering the content that may be in there in a way that they feel comfortable in delivering it. It is very much that space. I wouldn't say it's overly politicized at this point in time, but um, there are those elements that do make it hard. I know within a Tasmanian context, looking at policies development in this space has been quite tricky in terms of ensuring that there is, equality in terms of what's happening in our sporting spaces, for one, but doing it in a way that's going to make sense, doing it in a way that is not going to exclude others at the same time. So it's about finding that middle ground and having some really deep conversations, and that's where we're at the moment. We're having some really deep conversations in that space, from an education department point of view, and also with other external stakeholders. So it's a tricky space because it's about everyone getting onto the same page, and we know that's a very hard thing to do.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I that resonates so much, right? Implementation, regardless of where what country you're in, is I think continues to be one of the biggest challenges across the board. Is like if you can have real systems of strong implementation for the priorities or values you set, I mean, you're just going to have so
Yeah,
much more success with actually implementing. Hopefully, something that's pretty close to what the vision was. So
yeah,
that
yeah,
definitely resonates. You said something else that I was interested. So as I think you might know, my day to day, I'm very focused on college access, right? I work for an
yeah,
organization called One Goal, which is a national nonprofit here in the United States, which is really focused on helping first generation, low income college students with the opportunity to like have a strong post secondary transition or whatever they want to do after they graduate from high school. And so the reason that I think I even have a job is because here in the United States, unfortunately, is in a lot of public schools in particular, there aren't really strong resources for students
yeah,
transitioning from public high schools and onto the next step, right? In terms of just the advising, the guidance that they need to actually understand what options exist, understand how their particular academic credentials line up to what they're interested in. A lot of it too is just exposure, right? Students not even having the opportunities to learn about what's out there and opportunities. And so I've obviously talked in many episodes about how I think AI can help solve this here. But I know that you mentioned earlier that at 10th grade this transition now happens for students in Australia
yeah.
where
May
they're
have
going
lost you
to
there,
colleges. I'm
Daniel.
wondering if you could tell me just a little bit of what that transition looks like for students once they finish the system there. Are they going off to college? Are they going to? Do you all have strong vocational schools in Australia? What's the landscape look like over there?
Yeah, my main expertise has been in that P to 10 space, to year 10 space. But from what I understand, and as a lived experience too, going through the college system here, essentially speaking, there is a strong pathway towards vocational education. We have years 9 to 12 program where in years 9 to 10 you can start to access vocational pathways, look at apprenticeships, look at leaving at a point where you can be walking potentially into a job straight out of school. And then there's an academic pathway, years 11 and 12. We have our TCE scores, where we have various levels of subjects that count towards your TCE score. So if you have a pathway towards higher education at our universities, or obviously within at a national level as well. So there really does, from me looking as kind of outwards in, particularly coming back from China, and the experience over there, there are some pretty well set pathways for students. But I think it, again, hopefully at risk of jumping into that AI space, I do think there's some value in discussion around moving our years 7 and 8 education towards more of a 11 and 12 focus, where in our colleges here in Tasmania, they become a lot more autonomous in what they're doing. So they're expected to get to class. They're not going to be hounded. They're not going to be. It's more like that university environment where kids take a bit more ownership and a bit more autonomy in terms of what they're doing, what they're choosing in terms of subject areas, etc. And I think in our secondary space, moving into that area, into that kind of way of thinking, and there's various aspects of elements of AI that could potentially start to work in that space, from a support point of view with teachers, to deliver I still am a big believer that many education systems are still operating off the last 100 years of very similar structure. And it's time to, this AI period might be a time to review that and look at how we can build education to create autonomy at a younger age, so students stay engaged, because that's one of our biggest issues. I think just anecdotally, what I'm hearing from educators is that engagement is getting harder and harder with students.
Yeah, a lot of what you said is, I think, very similar to the United States educational experience as well, which is for, the system is so decentralized that for like a traditional, conventional, like public, I'd say large comprehensive high school, there is this like feeling of like systematically like we're behind and that the system hasn't like really evolved or like adjusted in a very big way in a very long time.
Yeah,
Um, and I think based on like the last thing you said there, this may be something that's in common as well, which is the pandemic was really hard and it's not over yet. I think in terms of like the effects of teachers and principals in terms of like how they're having to support students in schools. And one of the biggest things that I've heard from many of the principals that I connect with is that just developmentally, really social emotionally, a lot of students compared to, students a few years ago, they're just like some of the behaviors and some of the way that they're reacting to just like the overall structure of school is just very different. And in some cases, like they're having a much harder time like assimilating to like high
yeah,
school as an example, because their high school was you know in front of a computer for 18 months before they
mm.
really had an opportunity. I'm wondering, when you say engagement, is that kind of like what you mean? Is that a similar reaction,
Yeah,
or did you mean
yeah.
a different type
I,
of engagement?
I think the mode and delivery, isn't it? It's about how are we delivering content to students in a way that's going to capture their imagination. And I think you're very much right. There was that period over COVID and the pandemic where students may have felt a little bit of that autonomy, and in terms of there was maybe some decision making that they made around their own learning, in terms of that access, and it was online access, and I'm sure it wasn't perfect, and there was a lot of learning that happened from a system point of view, but also at that learner level. And there would be a portion of students that I think that potentially would have worked for in terms of how content was delivered online. And so you kind of wonder whether there's a portion of that as well that back into the kind of that face to face, structured bell to bell, I suppose, system. Although I know a lot of schools aren't using bells anymore, which is great. But yeah, moving from class to class, moving from that point of view where um, it's still effectively, walking into class, sitting down, listening to potentially listening to a teacher for 30 minutes, give instruction, and then go to your workbook, and off you go. I know from our department point of view here in Tasmania, we're really trying to create some more autonomy, and we know it's about instruction, it's about best practice, it's about trying to build collaboration within the class, and so we're trying to do what we can to start to build that. And I think there's baby steps, but definitely more can be done in the space. And that comes down to some really robust conversation, I think, at a federal level and also at a state level around how this looks within our schools.
Yeah, totally. And I think that problem resonates here as well, right? Where there's obviously other systematic challenges that exist, but I think fundamentally, if we truly do believe that one of the largest units of change for just educational advancement for students is a teacher in a classroom with students day to day, right? And really ensuring that like we're hitting just consistent home runs, right? Every single day in that instructional time, really ensuring that we're creating a structure, a format, really equipping our teachers with just everything they need to create an environment so it doesn't feel like 30 students
Yeah,
are just staring at a teacher drone on for 60
yeah,
minutes, right? Which unfortunately that has been the way, as we know, for hundreds of, or at least 100 years, right? If not
yeah,
potentially
yeah,
longer, but that's and it can't continue to be that way, right? Especially with technology. And so, I mean, you have obviously, this is where I think we can maybe start to jump into the AI piece of this now,
Mm.
or bring some of that in. I know that obviously you, I think very similar to my own perspective, see AI as like a tool that hopefully can help with this a little bit, and
Mm.
maybe still trying to figure out the boundaries and the parameters for what extent. What I find even more fascinating about your entry angle, though, is that you're doing this from a physical education standpoint. And when
Yeah.
I naturally think about physical education, that for me feels like is as in person and as human as it can possibly get, right? In terms of what you would expect that experience to look like. So I'm just very curious to hear, like, how have you been using AI? Like, how are you using AI within your
Yeah.
content
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
to enhance the physical education experience for students?
Yeah, thank you. And I suppose in my current role, so heavily involved in so in here in Tasmania, we're applying version 9 of the Australian curriculum into all of our schools. So the idea is that we have a team of curriculum leads that work to ensure that there are adequate resources for teachers to do this pivot, to change from what was 8.4, with quite a number of changes that have happened with version 9. So this was the year that there was the beginning of that implementation. And I think with that came the knowledge of, hang on a tick, teachers, just like I've heard in your previous podcast, and you've said a million times, teachers are busy. There's so much going on, particularly with, dealing with the social well-being of students and all of kind of the different strings attached to that space that they are dealing with on a day-to-day basis. So it's quite often for a busy teacher, uh, curriculum, which is so important, and the mode of delivery, which is so important, isn't potentially at the first thought when they wake up. They might be thinking of, how do I get through this day? How do I make sure that all the students' well-being is taken care of? And that's tricky. So part of our role has been developing resources to support schools and to support teachers. So providing professional learning also with those resources as well. So where I've been using AI, kind of, although in the HPE space, and I've been working in that health and physical education space, has really been about. I had an experience the other day where our department, beginning midway through last year, were developing achievement standard guides. So these achievement standard guides are looking at um, providing teachers with a set of guides that, when they are looking at developing assessments or aligning assessments, old assessments from 8.4 to the new version, they can look at achievement standard guide, which is basically a rubric that shows you, for the 8 achievement standard sentences for that year group and for that subject area, this is what it might look like. Here are the observable characteristics that you might see in an assessment or a task. Um, so then there's some consistency around, most importantly, language that are in those achievement standard guides. And if all the schools are looking at those to then develop their assessments and bring their own tasks to it and adapting, there's some consistency around how the rubric writing and the development of the assessment, the formative and also the summative assessment, is happening. And so there were working groups that got together, and these working groups spent a considerable amount of time deliberating. And you know what it's like when you bring passionate teachers together from all the same learning area. You get great, robust conversation, and you've got differences of opinion, and that's fine. And it's about developing these achievement standard guides. Anyway, so that process happened for a number of months. And then, as curriculum leads, it was our job to then refine those, make sure there was consistency, because there was different working groups for different year groups, P to 10. And so that was a large process. Now, during this period of time, there were some learning areas that haven't had curriculum leads. So in the arts area, there was some work that hadn't been completed. So I started to do or have a conversation with some music teachers, because they were saying, "Hey, what about us? Where's something that we can see, that we see the value in these ASGs, achievement standard guides? Where are they? So, given the conversations that I've been hearing in this podcast, and started to reach out and start using ChatGPT, um, I found myself in a space where I was like thinking, well, I think I could potentially create some ASGs through some really good prompting, even though ChatGTP isn't pulling directly from the current version 9 because it's dated thereafter. I can prompt it with the version 9 prompts to see what I come up with, see if it will come up with some rubrics with observable characteristics. And what took 3 to 4 months of deliberation from teachers and some strong, robust conversations with other learning areas, within 2 afternoons, I'd created ASGs for music that were concise, they were clear, the observable characteristics were spot on relating to your year groups. It was P to 6. I'm going to do some more work with secondary, but with the P to 6 age appropriateness in terms of the observable characteristics against the statements. It was amazing. Shared that with the music team, and they saw them and going and with straight away saying, "How did you do this so quickly?" And so there was an evidence of, although not HPE directed or HPE related, in my current role around developing resources with the right prompting. And this is the thing: it's a context and the understanding of the person doing the prompting. And this is where I always come with the clause with AI: don't get lazy. It's as simple as that. Don't be lazy. So do what you need to do with your prompting, and then start to query it, question it, mold it. And it's about using AI in that space. And I know you've spoken about previously, not just resting on your laurels in terms of using AI. It has to be used in a way that's still going to be, there's still going to be some extra prompting in that space. And so this was an example where that really worked well. And it's only now that we're starting a bit more of a journey in that line of my work where there's some conversations starting to happen at a curriculum level around, well, hang on, okay, what are we going to do in this space? And I know ACARA, which govern who govern Australian curriculum, they are starting some really strong conversations in the AI space through the digital tech area, and then how that's going to filter out to other learning areas. So yeah, sorry, not HP kind of related, but in terms of my current work, there was an example where what took a group or groups of people 3-4 months to develop. I wouldn't say that the prompting was finished. It's gone to the music working group, but it was a hell of a good start. A start that would have taken a lot longer for them to. Now they can really do their real contextual work, that they know how good or best practice happens in music, but they're starting with a template there that's already at a really high level. So it's the way I see AI, whether it is HP or any other subject area, is that it brings that level of application of practice to that next level before you apply it, if that makes sense. So you already got a head start where to begin with, you're scratching your head for 10-15 minutes before you get that first word down.
Yeah, I think your example resonates a lot, and to your point, I think that exact just example, I think, is something a lot of folks in education can relate to, right? In certain point, especially during this season, right? This season of summer, there's so many strategic planning days happening. There's so many retreats happening. There's so many, let's take 4 hours to talk about, these 5 group lessons. And to your point, one of the biggest challenges I have personally found in some of those spaces is inevitably when you enter those spaces, let's say you have a full day planning day with 5 other people, even if they're like 5 other people you really like, you're having like you're very just like collaborative colleagues, like you're inevitably just going to hit points where folks are just like tired, and there's like you need somebody who's like really good at like doing some of the wordsmithing, or somebody who can like
Yes.
ask the next guided question, but everybody's kind of also participating, right? So in so many ways, like it sounded like what you were able to do with ChatGPT is like it was able to serve as like kind of a pseudo like I don't want to use the word like facilitator, kind of facilitator, but also somebody who could do a tool that could do a lot of that wordsmithing behind the scenes, right? Where it's like, okay, these five groups, on their anchor charts, they said that these five priorities were the most important to them, in their scope and sequence going into next year. Can you help me to identify what were the five that came up the most? How would you wordsmith this into like
Yeah.
three or four mission statements? And to your point, you don't just take those and say, okay, we're done with our ASGs.
Yeah.
Like you now take those and you say, do these make sense? Does this tool have the appropriate context? But what it does is it just saves you so much mental bandwidth so that you
Ah,
can actually focus on being a contributor and an engager in those conversations rather than the one who's always having to do some of that synthesis. Think about how you wordsmith these things together, when
yeah.
in actuality it's about the content. It's less about the wordsmithing, but that can be such a time sucker in
Yeah.
these strategic planning conversations. And when you're developing tools for, I would say, a lot of different content areas, I can think of so many instances where um, in summers related to the work I've done at College Access, related to my work as an English teacher, where I was in those rooms in similar settings where, in the exact way that you've described it, having a tool like that of saying, okay, clearly, Mr. Lopez values this, she values this. Why don't I don't have an idea for how we create a statement. Can I just like put all these ideas here and see, and it's going to give me 10 examples, and then
Yeah.
and that's going to get my mind going now a little bit.
Yeah. Spot on. And um, just changing slightly from off that conversation, something I've been really thinking about is we've been doing this for years already with the technology, the breakthrough of technology in terms of movement, and this is where my HPE brain comes in. When was the first? I can't tell you the date when the first car was developed, but we've been applying what AI is potentially about to do or doing for knowledge. We've been applying that with the idea of movement. The reason we have cars, the reason we have aeroplanes, it doesn't mean we stop moving. We still keep fit. Well, most of us do, or plenty of us still strive to keep fit, keep moving, etc. And the idea and my thinking's been, particularly around AI, with people being, I suppose, challenged by it, is we've been supplementing movement to get from A to B to be able to do, essentially what we would never have been able to do, to be able to drive 30, 40K to get to town, to go do our shopping, to get what we want, kind of thing. Um, AI is potentially doing a similar thing in that it's taking us to that next level, so then we can really spend our time on the best practice, and spend the time to having the best conversation. So that grunt work of that vehicle taking you down the road is already happening, and that was kind of like a slight. I actually woke up the other night thinking about that one. It was just kind of pinged into my head, and there's that alignment, and it's a little bit left field, but I really see that's kind of where I think AI is moving, in that it's a vehicle um, for whether it's you working by yourself in a small business trying to develop a project or develop a product, using AI as that vehicle, or if it is a working group of teachers looking to, as you said, have some strategic planning around the next year, using that as a vehicle. And so it's really interesting context, and something that kind of has been folding around in my brain a little bit, of recent.
Yeah, totally agree. I mean, I think when I think even about my own use cases of AI, like oftentimes people ask me, like, you're somebody who's obviously spent a lot of time, researching using AI. Like even before I started this podcast, I probably had about 10 to 15 hours in ChatGPT just exploring with prompting,
Yeah,
watching YouTube videos about people doing it. And now obviously that's gone up even further. And so folks will ask me like, how do you use ChatGPT? And so oftentimes what I will respond is exactly, I think, what you're describing, which is most of the time I find myself when I'm using ChatGPT is I'm using it for strategic planning, or I'm using it to help me consolidate tools that I can do. But it's like if I do it, it's going to take me 2 hours, and I can have a working draft of something using ChatGPT in 15 seconds, and then I can then make my own enhancements. But then it's just going to save me a bunch of time, so that instead of doing something that is only going to help me increase my effectiveness or optimization, or achieve a mission or a task that I'm trying to do by 15%, I can open up that space and focus on like a bigger picture item that is like really going to help me towards a goal
Mm.
or a project that I have. Right, an example I would provide there is, even as thinking about this podcast, I made the decision to kind of like start a Medium page for it. And I was like, well, let me just start with one blog post. When I wrote that blog post, I didn't write the blog post all single hand by myself. What I did is I took I first asked myself, and this is where, like I used the collaboration of
Yeah.
myself with the AI tools. First, I asked myself, what was a compelling episode that I had that like folks really, seem to enjoy? By far, my most listened to episode is episode 3, which is like, what should schools be teaching students about AI, like, or excuse me, in a world of AI, what should students be, or schools be teaching students, right? I kind of lay out my white paper of like what I think students should be learning. So what I did is I took that session outline and I said, okay, can you help me to transform this into a blog post? I wanted to include like, these pieces. I want to make
Yep.
sure it hits this. And so I kind of did a prompt. I then took that, and then I said, well, I want to make sure that I'm putting an intro about like where this is coming from. So I wrote those myself. Then I modified those. I was like, well, I don't really like those parts. I feel like this point is incorrect. Like you kind of laid it out this way. It's actually more about this. And then I did a lot of wordsmithing. It probably would have taken me maybe about 3 to 4 hours to write the blog post. It took me about 90 minutes with the
Mm.
collaboration with AI
Yep.
to do it. And so that's a lot of time I saved. I was able to get out some ideas. And so um, I just, again, what you're saying really resonates. And the reason I continue to harp on this point is because I think everybody has these examples, right? Whether
Mm.
you're a principal, you're a guidance counselor, you're a different content teacher, there's some questions. We all have those moments where we're tired, and we have
Yeah.
like our brains are tired, and we're being asked like these questions, or we're being asked to create some guide, we're being asked to synthesize something, we're being asked to summarize something, we're being asked our opinions on something. And just by starting to talk and interact with this tool a little bit, it's going to get your mind going. Like
Yeah.
it's going to bring
Correct.
some of those juices back for you, so it doesn't feel like you are stuck. And I think that's the biggest thing I'm hoping that educators take away. I know that a lot of the continued dialogue, I think, in education spaces here in the United States, it continues to be around lesson planning, like how
Yep.
teachers can use
Yeah.
that for lessons plan. And I think that's great. But what I also want us to continue to push past is realizing that beyond lesson planning, I think you said this earlier before we actually hit record, is like AI can really be like your assistant, right? It's not just lesson
Yeah.
planning. It's a
Yeah.
lot of these like
Yeah.
strategic planning elements, these administrative elements that you can actually use, and think of it as like your own assistant to like help mitigate some of these tasks
Yeah.
for you,
Yeah.
so that it
Yep.
opens up other more exciting work that you can engage in.
Yeah. Exactly. And it's also opening up opportunities for this space in terms of I've got a good friend of mine here in Tasmania, Jake Chamberlain, who's starting up a small business, teacher AI business, where he's using ChatGPT to talk with his website to begin some prompting. So if a teacher goes against version 9, I would like to see a lesson on maths. Puts in some prompting details that he's got on the website, and next thing you know, bang, it comes up. Then they take that and they can refine it. It's that blueprint that often is the real sticking point. Um, Not to say there needs to be that prior knowledge. So the education before moving into the space is so important. Um, and how that might look at a university level to ensure that there's that context and that understanding. So when you do use these tools for the generation of either lesson planning or doing a learning plan for a student, whatever that might look like, you've got that context, you've got that knowledge, and you can apply it, and you can tweak and adapt what's being generated out. Because again, I think the the response that you get from AI is only as good as a prompt that you give it, and if you give it the right prompting. And so he's developed this brilliant website that effectively um, gives those that starting tool, and he's got some really good prompts in there to kind of start that process for teachers. So yeah, it's a really interesting space, I think, and it's only going to get better and improve. I think it's Microsoft going to be dropping their AI tools within PowerPoint, within Word, and so people are going to be tacitly using AI. I think potentially without even realizing it in 5 years' time. It's going to just be an afterthought almost in terms of this space. So it's an exciting time. I think personally, it's a really exciting time to be, particularly in education, where we're seeing across multiple jurisdictions here in Australia, and sounds like in many other places across the world, where it's really going to be of value for educators at all levels, as you said. Doesn't matter whether you're a principal, an assistant principal, or if you're working as a maths teacher or English teacher. There's going to be the entry point. The entry point for its use is just mind blowing, I think.
Yeah, to your point, and I recently saw a study, and I would imagine that in probably the business and technology community in Australia, it's similar, where they talked about it, like pretty much essentially every large company has already integrated AI in some type of way
Yeah,
within either their products or their organization, or has at least explored what it looks like. And I think you said it well there, which is really the successful implementation in AI is when you're using it and you actually don't even like, it's just like a part of like what you're doing, you don't even know, right? And to a certain extent, we've already like kind of tiptoed around that a little bit. I mean, for our young people, as an example, there's a lot of video games now that like have implemented AI tools within like some of the creator things that you can create. And I've said in previous episodes that I think that the big way, our young people are going to first experience AI is going to be through video games. Like I think
yeah,
that's like for us and for a lot of like working professionals, it's ChatGPT, it's some of these other things. I actually think for high school students downward, it's going to be Roblox, it's
yeah,
going to be Fortnite.
yep,
That's going to be how they experience AI tools first. And but for many of us, it might be as you described. It's like I'm creating a PowerPoint slide, and then all of a sudden there's 15 generated examples of like, would you prefer one of these? And it's being done through AI. I didn't know it,
yeah,
but I'm like, oh, that's great. And it's
yeah,
just a little
yeah.
feature that was added to the products there. You said something earlier that I want to make sure that I don't forget, because I want to transition this conversation a little bit now to talk about the student facing implications on this. So we spent a lot of time talking about AI implementation as it relates to educators, right, and the
Mm, mm,
practitioners.
mm.
One thing that you had said earlier was that I think you had mentioned that either state or maybe the federal entity was exploring just like ways to like integrate AI further into just like the overall experience. You said something along those lines, and I'm wondering if the conversation at all has been around like student ways that you're considering putting AI tools or experiences in front of students, just as another example, or something else I'd love to get your thoughts on. So as I mentioned, I'm a big student and proponent. I'm definitely on the dean's list for YouTube University. Spent a lot of time there, and just reading, learning, and engaging with content. And something that I've definitely seen is a lot of folks who have used AI tools such as ChatGPT to get like nutritional plans, get workouts. Like, give me a workout that's like 45 minutes and
Yep, yep.
includes these and that. I'm just kind of curious, like your experience doing some of those things, or other use cases that you've seen, and just in general, like how have you all thought about bringing student use cases
Yeah,
into
yeah,
the
yeah.
educational experience?
I really think it's an untapped conversation, particularly in our space. I think a lot of the conversation has been, from a curriculum point of view, has been for how it can be of use for teachers. But I think this is a space that there can be some really good, strong conversation. In terms of from a HPE point of view, um, analysis, movement analysis in our secondary space. Um, part of what the in the Australian curriculum achievement standards is looking at year 9 and 10 students doing some analysis of movement. So if they were doing a high jump or doing football kick, whatever that might be, um, that teachable moment where if you've got a device that's recording, they move around, they look at their performance, Imagine if there's an AI application. Well, I know there already is in basketball, at least. I can't remember what the name of the actual application is, but essentially, it'll look at a movement and it will give some dot points for what you're seeing, and then what can you do better next. So imagine if there's that teacher is working off to the side on another court, working on some skills with students. There are some other students that are doing a performance and rotating, and they are going to this screen and they're getting some cues about what they can do to improve their performance. Um, and then, or it might be asking some questions. What do you think about this? How can you do this? And so it's that application of using technology in the class where various apps, I can see various apps. There's ones out there already, Coach's Eye, etc. That helps with that analysis of movement. But the AI can take it to that next step where the students are getting instant feedback at the point that they need it. Because we know, there's no point telling a student feedback on a skill on a written note at the end of a class. They're already thinking about the next class. They're already on their way to doing something different. Their brain has already moved to a different space. So I think at point feedback in the movements strand of HPE can be really, 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 really influential. So that's just one example of its use. I think you've spoken about barriers in your previous conversations. I think the barriers are where private sector might have a one-to-one device ratio in certain contexts here in Tasmania. There will potentially be public schools that don't have that opportunity, might not have that one-to-one device. So if there is, if AI is being used within a classroom, it's about, I think, at a jurisdictional level, thinking about the divide not getting bigger. I know you've spoken about that a little bit. But it's a really interesting space in HPE that can be used where I can see it being used straight away.
Yeah, that's the two examples you brought up are very fascinating. I think too, again, going back to, I think what I've found so interesting so far about our conversation is even though your content is very focused on physical education and mine is like very college access, there are still like I think the exact ways that we're using AI is like almost very similar in terms of the action, right? Which is like there's obviously this entire bucket we described of like strategic planning, administrative support. But now I think as you've described, there's also this very other important um, student facing layer that exists
Mm,
within the educational experience, which is really regardless of the class and content, what do students need to be successful? They need
mm,
feedback, right? Don't matter if it's a sport, don't matter if it's English class, don't matter if it's science class, right? They need feedback. And really this is like sparking for me now because I've obviously had some folks on prior episodes who've really shown how we can provide feedback within English or within writing or some of those things. Um, but I think what you've described is very fascinating. I'd be willing to bet there's a bunch of like high school football coaches in Texas gushing over, something like this, where as you described, like even imagining like being able to take out your phone or something, record somebody making a tackle or kicking a goal or
mm,
shooting a free throw. And then as you've described, like there's AI tools built in where it can give them instant feedback because I know oftentimes coaches are tasked with, a team of 20 plus people and then they're doing a real time movement really fast and you somehow had to have memorized it and say, oh, actually you need to get a little bit lower, make sure your head's up and all these things. And it's like, I mean, yeah, there's amazing coaches who can do that, but for many coaches it's near impossible, right? And so being able to just record it and then now the app is doing, and then you can have a conversation about what that means. I think that would be huge,
exactly.
especially here in the United States where American football, obviously, something we're very passionate about. We love. Also, is very dangerous though, especially for young people. Be in particular the tackling motion and
Mm,
being
mm,
able to have that extra support. I can instantly see how a tool like that could be adopted. Everybody's doing a tackling drill. You record every single person and say, "Look, you got to put your head up. You got to make sure you're
mm,
hitting with your shoulder. You got to make
yeah.
sure you're doing this." And just seeing use cases already for something like that. So that resonates. I also think the other thing that you said, which I find also very interesting. And again, I feel like we're throwing out free ideas right now for people to make money off of. But here's another one, which is, we there was a chatbot company that I recently talked to, really focused on mental health, named alongside that, and they're doing really great work. But
Yeah.
what you said also sparked for me this idea that this could also probably very much be applied to like nutrition and physical ed support, right? Where there's maybe some, you call it the My Coach app or whatever it is, and
Mm,
it's like
mm.
an AI bot who somebody could put, what are your goals? Maybe weight loss, muscle
Yep.
building. What is it, right? You put in a couple of things, maybe like a diet, and then it just gives you basic high level nutritional advice. And then maybe if a school has it, you could also it could also be flagged for like the other PE teachers there. So it's like, if there's any flags to be aware of, then the real professional is like aware of that. But it's just like another tool that they have to engage with. So just a lot of these things feel very universal across content here.
Are we good? I think we're good.
Yeah, you froze a little
Yeah,
bit on my end, but I
yeah,
think you're coming
yeah.
in okay.
No, we're good now. Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Um, yeah. So you're just mentioning that last point.
Yeah, just the chatbot. I mean, so
Yeah,
again, and just like again, it being a tool for PE teachers, I think oftentimes here, at least in the United States, is how it looks. Oftentimes, a physical ed teacher is going to have 50 to 75 students in their class, especially in high school, right there,
yeah.
telling them like, hey, go run the track or do some of these things. But now imagine having like a chatbot support that each student could interact with on their phone or something, like, hey, put in
Correct.
some of your goals, or, what sports are you really excited about? Like, what are
Yeah,
some activity?
yeah,
And then it gives you like some daily activity you could do based on what you like. Instead of, if I don't like to go walk the track, maybe I could go play basketball
yeah,
for 20
yeah.
minutes, or I can easily imagine there being resources like that students would really enjoy. And you can, again, gamify some of them, right? Where it's
Oh,
like,
massively.
yeah, and so it's like, oh, you 5 days in a row you met your physical goal, so you get a silver badge or whatever this week, a silver medal. And
Yeah,
just
yeah.
and I think kids would really like that.
I've been thinking about one, and again, while we're throwing free ideas out there, an idea of the I'm bored app. So I've got an 8-year old who I was at work. I was doing working from home, and he had the last day of holidays, and my wife was at a PL day at her school, and organised some things for him to do, and he came up and said, "Oh, Dad, I'm bored," and I started thinking, I was like, "Hang on a tick, imagine if there was an iPad off to the side." Again, not supplementing or replacing the parent, but the idea of, okay, what come over here. Here are some ideas that are going to pop out at you about what do you have in the house. It will ask you some prompts. What do you have in the house? And for a kid, it might be looking at different pictures, and they select the picture of what they might have in the house, and then it will come up with some ideas for them to do. And that might be through a voice, rather if they're quite young, it might be through a voice prompt, or it might be through the word prompt. So the idea that you could also have a parent who might be working from home for whatever reasons and needs a little bit of extra support on the side, not to replace parenting or replace that, but to have some support in that space. So uh, the child can come up with some great physical activities to do, or whether it's art or whether it's going and doing a puzzle, because sometimes all that child needs is that spark, and that spark to go, oh, that's what I can do. And often that's what happens as a parent. You remind them of the things they enjoy, and the next thing you know, they're off going and doing it.
Yeah, it resonates. I'm taking notes here as you're talking, so that when my little guy gets a little older. So Michael, let me leave you with this question. So you've spent a lot of time, just as I have, learning the tools, growing in your AI comfort and capacity. What's your hope for AI in terms of how it can impact or transform the educational
Yeah.
experience in Australia? If you could, if there was like one use case you really see, you could wave your magic AI wand, what would you use it to support the educational system out there to do?
Yeah, for me, it comes down to best practice from a teacher point of view. Because I think if we can use AI essentially to upgrade, to find that entry point that teachers are at a higher level than what they were prior to, that will end up in better student outcomes. It will end up in better content. The content being delivered in a more succinct, deliverable way that will increase student engagement. So for me, it really pivots from a system point of view, making some decisions around, well, what does it look like? What does best practice AI look like in education? And how can we use that to improve student outcomes without increasing the divide from an equity point of view? Um, that's some robust conversations that need to happen, because I seriously think, and you've spoken about guardrails, you've spoken about boundaries in previous episodes, that there needs to be some robust conversations in this space to ensure that that doesn't happen, because we can see the potential benefits. It's um, I'm surprised when I talk to people from time to time, and they'll ask about, well, what is AI, and they've had no thinking in this space yet, and then you get that little flicker of gold in your heart, and you go, well, come over here and I'll show you. And you see in their face, you see in their faces, they see how you might apply it in their context for whatever they're trying to do. Um, and that's dynamite. So I think, yeah, for me, it's definitely how can we provide support to staff in schools, regardless of role, whether you're a teacher, school health nurse, whether you're the principal, a facility attendant. How might it look in a school context to lift everyone up, to take that kind of burden that we do find is within schools at this point in time, to not replace what we're doing, but get everyone to that next level to then build from there.
Yeah, what you're saying resonates so much. And to your point, I was recently reading, probably in the last week or so, that in the last like month or so, that AI tools, in particular ChatGPT's use case, has like the usage of just like individual users using it over the like months of May and June went down like 40%. And a lot of people were like, well, why is that happening? And I'm like, well, I can tell you. And the article logically came to the same conclusion, which is a lot of people are using it for education. School's out, right? And
Yeah,
so people
yeah.
aren't using ChatGPT. They're out. They're kayaking and out in the sun, hopefully, and doing some
Doing
fun
those,
stuff.
correct.
And I hope that, and honestly, that makes me very happy that folks are doing it, and not continuing to use it if that's ultimately what we're using it for. But to your point, as we start to ramp up and get back into the school year and we start to do more of those in-person days, one thing that I am hoping is that every single school district and schools can at least engage in some dialogue around this, because as you've described, I still think we're in this kind of introductory stage. There's many of us who have kind of gone past that, but the sector as a whole is definitely not past that yet. And so, as you said, hopefully, both of our homework today, and anyone out there listening to this episode, your homework today, grab somebody who could really benefit from an AI tool and spend 30 minutes with them, just showing them how to use the tool, and let them just explore, because I think it's going to take still more of that for us to really get enough practitioners on this to where it becomes a more mainstream part of the conversation. The media is obviously spending a lot of time talking about this, but when you go into schools, it's not really something that a lot of schools are talking about. You got the 5 teachers in the school that really care, and then everybody else doesn't really care right now. So we'll see if it's different at the beginning of this next year. I don't really see indicators right now to suggest that it will be, but we'll see. We'll see what happens. And so, Michael, really appreciate your time. Thanks so much for joining the conversation, and very excited to just continue to stay connected with you and hear about how you're using your AI tools to impact the students of Australia.
Thank you very much, Daniel. I'm a big fan of your podcast. It's actually, we're back at school at the moment, so I've been keeping an eye, seeing when the next kind of podcast is going to come up. But I know you've been a busy man in another part of your life, so I'll forgive you for not popping one up in the last couple of weeks.
Thank you. I know you're going to help me break that bubble of not having an episode in a couple of weeks here. And yeah, hopefully we'll get ramped up back up soon. Obviously, as I told you already. So he got promoted to dad. So that's been taking up a lot of time. And I'm very excited for that new chapter, and definitely hoping to continue my learning journey alongside you as well, and alongside many other educators who are hoping to just make our lives easier and transform the way that we educate ourselves and students. So yeah, hoping to get back to it.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. And thank you for the opportunity. I see so much value in conversation and collaboration and talking. And I'd love to hear more about what's happening in this space, and particularly your updates. That's what I really enjoy, because I need a short 10-minute kind of in a day-to-day basis. If you're doing the research for me, that's, you're helping me out. So thank you for that part of your podcast too. That really helps.
I got you. That's good to know. I'm gonna make sure I hook up with the updates on our episode too, so you hear them. Okay.
Brilliant. Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks, Michael. Thanks for listening to the AI Education Conversation. Give a follow, rate, and review wherever you listen. For all show notes and to share your thoughts on today's episode, check out the AI Ed Convo on Twitter. See you next time.